to now the final book of this cycle of Torah, Sefer Devarim, Deuteronomy. It's called Moshe's Last Will and Testament. It's almost exclusively him giving his final teaching to Bnei Yisrael, mostly recounting the journeys that they went through, the crises that they faced, and also many of the teachings that were handed down to him by God, and that we presume that he taught over the period of 38 years, where we have really nothing to tell us what's going on during that period in Torah. So now we get a little synopsis, kind of a Reader's Digest version. And of course, that means that so many of our sages said, well, why would Moshe put some things in, leave some things out, add some things to some familiar stories, and change some stories in the way to where they end up sounding like they're in opposition to the original retelling, which is earlier in the Torah. So maybe as we go through Sefer Devarim, I can point out some of those inconsistencies or additions, because to me, those are really interesting, how things get added in or how they get changed now in the retelling. Of course, memory plays a role in that, although we're going to presume that Moshe had a perfect memory. And that if he added something in, it wasn't just him making something up because it was convenient for his storytelling, but something perhaps that didn't make it into the earlier part of the Torah that sheds more light on exactly what has brought us to this point. So it's very interesting going through this book of the Torah and comparing it elsewhere in Torah where some of the same stories are told. Moshe knows that he's about to die. These are the last 5 weeks of his life. And I believe that this book and his speech is all about him wanting to inspire us to keep the commandments, to follow God's laws, and then ultimately to cross over and govern themselves in a righteous way. And of course, that's where fear can settle in and change your entire narrative, tell you lies that you then believe instead of knowing what the truth is. So I think a good lesson for all of us is to be aware when we're in the grip of fear and try to take a step back from it so that we can see how that's changing our perspective and pushing us away from the truth of what's before us. So much of what I'm going to share tonight and teach is once again inspired by the teachings of Dr. Aviva Zornberg. She doesn't have a book on Sefer Devarim per se, but the last chapter of her book on Numbers, the book that we just completed, which is called Bewilderment's Reflection on the Book of Numbers, the last chapter really provides a bridge from the end of the book that we finished last week and the beginning of the book that we're reading now. The other book of hers, in case you're interested and want to read along with or read for yourself, the other book that I'm using as a companion and a guide for me is her biography of Moshe. Since this book is exclusively from Moshe's point of view, it's really interesting to read her biography of Moshe along with Sefer Devarim, because not only do we get a lens through Moshe's eyes and the words that he delivers in Torah that we're reading, but we also get the additional unbelievably perceptive lens of Dr. Zornberg, who is a master of not only all things Judaic, but psychology and literature and poetry and even philosophy. So much like Rabbi Finley, she gives us a wonderful, all-encompassing and modern perspective of what it means to be Moshe and what it means to be us, a wonderful unveiling of the human condition. So the first issue that I'm going to concentrate on is the issue of crossing over. We're now at the precipice, we're at the brink. We've just won our wars with Sihon and Og. There's nothing to stop us from getting into the river and crossing over and then doing what needs to be done on the other side, which is we'll be under the aegis of Joshua as our leader and as our general, because there will be more wars that have to be waged once we cross over to the other side. So this word for crossing over in Hebrew is an interesting one. It's avar. It'll seem a little bit familiar to you when I explain exactly how. So for example, the root of avar is the same root as ivri, which is a Hebrew man. So Abraham was first named as Avram ha-Ivri, Avram the Ivri, the man who crossed over. Now, what did he cross over from? Well, our sages tell us that he was on one side, let's say metaphorically, believing in the one true God, and a monotheist, and everyone else from the nations were on the other side, being idolaters. So that's one way of looking at crossing over and Ivri. Another way of looking at it is geographically, when God told him to leave your father's house, leave the land that you know, everything that you know, and go to the land that I will show you. He started on a journey and was basically homeless, and also an alien and a stranger wherever he went. So he was an Ivri, the one on the other side, who's also a person in opposition to the values and everything known of the people that he encountered. So if we think of him as somebody who stood alone on the other side, then it helps us understand, first of all, why his journey was so difficult. He didn't just cross the Euphrates, which is what some people think is meant by Ivri, the other side. He was somebody who stood on the other side of almost everything that was known and important to all the other nations. So for example, he spoke a different language. He looked different. He ate different foods. But most importantly, he worshiped a different and unique God. This word avar also has another surprising association, which I only discovered this week, actually. So thank you for giving me the burden and privilege of teaching, because I really learned so much from knowing that I'm going to have to teach. Avar is also the root of the word avera, and many of you know that the word avera means sin or transgression, as in a transgression against man or against God. And we can see it in there. Avera, the aver part, shows us the common root. So the implied meaning is that a person who has committed an avera has transgressed, which is also another meaning of the word to cross over. Transgress, that means to go across, literally, some type of moral boundary, and has crossed over into a forbidden area. So in that sense, an avera is the opposite of a mitzvah being an urging from God to do or not do something. An avera is an urging that comes from ourself, the Yetzer Hara part of ourself, perhaps, to do or not do something that God doesn't want us to do, that we're not commanded to do. So in our parsha, we start out from Moshe's point of view, and he immediately expresses his desire to cross over. And it's not just a geographical one. So here's how our parsha opens up. If you've got a chumash, you can open it to our first chapter, which is also called Dvarim. These are the words which Moshe spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan in the desert, in the plain opposite the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hazarot and Di Zahav. So we see here is a permutation of the word avar right in the first verse, because it puts Moshe geographically on the other side of the Jordan, opposite to where the destination is, to where the geographic goal is, so to speak. So we know that God's previous decree that Moshe will not be permitted to cross over, and in fact that he will die on this side of the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan, is one that upsets and perplexes us every year. So I've been trying to offer an explanation for this harsh decree. I shared with you my own personal midrash of a private conversation that God had with Moshe. saying, I'm going to have to sacrifice you and Aaron and Miriam, actually my own reputation and yours a bit. This is God speaking to Moshe, because it's more important that we teach the people and we scare them straight, so to speak, and we inspire them both in a positive way and also instill a good kind of fear that they not do certain things, because you're not going to be around to help keep them on the straight and narrow. But we know that even if we accept that there was a private conversation like that, that Moshe does desperately want to cross over. And how do we know that? Because next week, we will see that there is recounting of another conversation that we didn't know that Moshe had, that had to do with him asking God again, imploring God, ve'et hanan. In fact, next week's parsha, ve'et hanan, that means, and he begged and he implored, referring to Moshe speaking to God, asking once again, please let me cross over. He doesn't just want to cross over. Moshe is also worried about the people being without him, since they had become so dependent upon him, worried that they will relapse and transgress and forget, which we all do. And also, Moshe wants to cleave to the land. The rest of the people that survived the generational problem of not being able to cross over, the rest of the people, the ones that are still alive today, were told to cleave to the land. And I talked a little bit last week about this whole idea of cleaving, to veikut, which is a really kind of a mystical attachment, a profound, I think I called it a profound attachment to the land, which is a good way to put it, a profound and almost visceral attachment to the land. And he wants to experience that. So right after Moshe introduces the Parsha and his speech, the first thing he recounts to them is that conversation in which he told the people, I cannot carry you alone. So we're projected all the way back to when the people were at the foot of Mount Sinai, and Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, comes to see him while they're encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai. And he notices that Moshe is counseling the people from morning till night, settling their dispute. And this is a 24/7 without a break type of undertaking. And Yitro says to Moshe, you're going to wear yourself out. You can't do this. Here's what I propose, that you provide for yourself people that are well-known, wise, and understanding, and that you set up a system of justice so that other people can make the decisions on all but the most difficult cases. And then you, Moshe, Yitro is telling him, you, Moshe, will make the decision on the difficult cases. So Moshe tells the people in our Parsha that when he tells them, I cannot carry you alone, he continues and says, and this is also, we think, a recap of the conversation after Yitro gives him this good advice. How can I alone carry your contentiousness, your burdens, and your quarrels? So from this we know, when he tells the people, I cannot carry you alone, it's not just a statement of how increased their numbers have become, meaning he's not just telling them, I can't carry you alone because you become so numerous as God has promised. You're blessed with these great numbers. It's impossible for one man to do it. That's part of it. But he also includes, I cannot carry you alone because you're so difficult. You're contentious. You're quarrelsome. You're rebellious. So that's when he tells the people, and this is a recap of his conversation with the people, provide for yourselves distinguished men who are wise, understanding, and well-known to your tribes, and I shall appoint them as your heads. So that was done. And what our sages tell us was actually at that point, when the judges were appointed and we were at the base of Mount Sinai, the original intention was immediately to go over to the side of the Jordan, conquering whoever we came in contact with along the way and cross over. little did we know at that time that it would be another almost 40-year journey until we got to this point. So Moshe then, after repeating this conversation that took place at Mount Sinai, he retells the story of the sin of the spies. And here he retells it with some interesting additions. For example, in the original telling of the story, we are told that God tells Moshe, select for yourself leaders of each tribe and send them to scout out the land, spy out the land. But here in the retelling, we're told that all of the people came to him and said, select people from us to go and spy out the land ahead of time. And Moshe apparently responded, that was good in Moshe's eyes. So this is a slightly different retelling. This is what I referred to before, how we really get a nuanced, interesting, and different perspective from having some of the familiar stories retold with these additions, subtractions, or even changes that on the surface seem inconsistent with the original telling. So we know that the sin of the spies ended in a horrible tragedy. It resulted in God becoming so angry when the spies came back with an evil report that God decreed that the entire previous generation would lose the right to cross over and enter the land. So Moshe is telling this story, and then he adds something really surprising in our parsha this week, and he says, the Lord was also angry with me because of you, saying, neither will you go there. So a careful reader of Torah is really going to be surprised by this, because in the original telling of the story in Hukat, a few parshas ago, we weren't told that God was angry because of the people. We were told that God was angry with Moshe because he didn't sanctify God in the sight of the people, a reference to God, to Moshe striking the rock when commanded to speak to the rock. Here, there's no mention of the striking the rock at all. So why would Moshe blame the people? And he blames them again in next week's parsha, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that because these two sections are so related. So Moshe is renewing his request, saying to God, let me now cross over and see the good land that is on the other side of the Jordan, this good mountain and the Lebanon. So Moshe is asking God to reconsider the decree and let him cross over. And apparently this was a conversation that took place that we have no other record of, but Moshe is retelling it to the people here. And then he tells the people, as I said, that God became angry with me because of you, and he did not listen to me. And instead he said to me, it is too much for you. And here's the really harsh language. God tells Moshe, do not continue to speak to me further about this matter. This is right at the beginning of next week's parsha. And in this way, we learn that a conversation took place that we wouldn't have known about except for Moshe retelling it here to the people. And we learn that Moshe asked God to reconsider this really harsh decree. So what would prompt this new request? It's a really interesting question, and our sages have a lot of interesting answers to this. What would prompt the new request? So here's some ideas. The commentators offer some really good explanations, in my opinion. The people have made recently several requests, petitions of their own to God. For example, we just read about the petition of the daughters of Zelophehad. They were excluded from land ownership, and their father died without sons. And in professing their love to keep the name of their father alive, to invest him with a heritage in the land, and also because they love the land and want a heritage in the land, they make their request to be given a share. So we just learned about that. That was a couple parshas ago. So Moshe has witnessed this. And he's witnessing God's response. God considers the request and says, the daughters of Zelophehad speak righteously, and then goes on to amend God's own law in the Torah, which is why the daughters of Zelophehad are given ownership credit and authorship credit for some of the psukim, some of the verses in the Torah. So Moshe has just witnessed this. And then right at the end of our parsha, last week, we witnessed that some of the people of the tribe of Menashe, which is the same tribe as the daughters of Zelophehad and their father, also come forward and say, there could be an unintended consequence from giving the land to the daughters of Zelophehad. If they marry outside their tribe, then the land will be subsumed into other tribes and we'll end up losing some of the heritage given to the tribe of Menashe. So Moshe listens to this request, thinks that it's reasonable, and amends that as well. And God does not object to this. So we have to presume that God approved of this. Of course, Moshe was merely using the precedent that God used in granting the daughters of Zelophehad's request in now granting the tribe of Menashe's request. So Moshe witnesses this as well. And then finally, last week, which I spent a lot of time on, the leaders of the tribes of Reuven and Gad come forward and they have a request. They want permission to stay on the other side of the Jordan. They see it as a good pasture land and grazing land for their flocks. So they approach Moshe, and even though Moshe is angry at first, they have a very nice and civil discussion about it, which actually is a model for us on how to make a request, clarify a request, show that there's a meeting of the mind, and be specific enough to where both sides know what they're agreeing to, what their obligation is, and what the consequences are if they don't fulfill their obligation. So we get that petition, and Moshe eventually grants that request. So we have Moshe then witnessing the request of the daughters of Zelophehad, which result in the Torah being amended, and then the requests of the men of the tribe of Menashe, which also results in an amendment to that amendment, and then this other request of Reuven and Gad. So we have to think, and our sages agree, that Moshe thought, maybe now is a good time for me to speak up. God is open to the idea of petitions, open to the idea of even some petitions which would say that perhaps the Torah wasn't correct and complete in the way it was originally written and needs to be amended. But no, that's not the case. God reacts angrily to Moshe's request to be allowed to cross over. And Moshe recounts this conversation to the people and blames the people. So Zornberg talks about why Moshe would repeatedly blame the people in our parsha and then at the beginning of next week's parsha, and why he would even share this harsh and perhaps humiliating exchange with God. She brings in a commentary from the Mei HaShiloach. So as you may know, very often our sages are called by the name of the book that they're most famous for having written. And they're called by the name of the book. So for example, we talk about the Sfat Emet, which means the language of truth, or in Yiddish, we call them the Svas Emes. And that's the collection of teachings of Yehuda Aryeh Libalter. So he's known by the name of his most famous book. So is the Mei HaShiloach, whose real name was Mordechai Yosef Lehner, and he lived from 1801 to 1854, also known as the Ishbitzer Rebbe, because he was the founder of the Ishbitzer Hasidic dynasty. And he became known by his magnum opus, which is this Mei HaShiloach that I'm referring to, which means the waters of Shiloach, or the waters from a well or fountain located in Jerusalem, even though the title is commonly translated as the living waters. So this is a wonderful book, his commentary on the Torah. And Zornberg cites him and offers an additional little description of him that he comes up with sometimes really novel and interesting and controversial explanations of difficult Torah verses. And he, in fact, does that with this verse. And the verse that he concentrates on is the verse, "Do not continue to speak to me further about this matter." And this is God's harsh response to Moshe when Moshe asks once again to be allowed to cross over. But he not only concentrates on that sentence, he concentrates on the word "me." Do not continue to speak to me. So Zornberg explains that the importance of this verse is that it teaches that there is a subtle hint to Moshe by God that he should take his petition elsewhere. So when God says, "Do not continue to speak to me," he's not merely harshly saying, "I'm fed up, don't talk to me anymore." He's suggesting to Moshe that Moshe speak to someone other than God. So who should he speak to about this issue? Well, the answer, according to the Mei HaShiloach, is to the people. After all, and here's the rationale, whenever God threatened the people with death or total destruction, and we read about that over and over, God gets angry with the people, he threatens to wipe them out, start over with Moshe, or he threatens other kinds of foundational destruction. And Moshe was there to run interference for the people. God would then listen to Moshe and to his persuasive pleas, and usually that resulted in God changing God's mind, or at least mitigating the original threat. So now the Mei HaShiloach, as taught by Zornberg, see that there's an inference here for Moshe to subtly suggest that the people undertake his cause. In other words, from this one line about "do not speak further to me about this matter," we are to learn that God is supposed to somehow, that Moshe is supposed to somehow hint to the people that it is up to them now. Just like Moshe was their advocate, now Moshe needs the people to be his advocate. Plead in his behalf to allow Moshe to enter the land, but they fail to take the hint. They're obtuse about the clues that are given, and the clues are not huge, obviously, because I never noticed it until Zornberg pointed it out to me. So here's the interesting connection. He hopes to convey to the people that it is now their turn to say something on his behalf, that they need to, and here's the key thing, that they need to raise their voices in sincere and heartfelt prayer, asking God to change God's mind and let Moshe enter the land. So the obvious question here is, why is Moshe not able to tell the people directly that this is what he wants? So there's a couple reasons for that. One reason from my point of view is that very often it's much easier for a person to advocate on someone else's behalf than ask for things for oneself. So perhaps Moshe, being the most humble of all people, was not comfortable with the idea of coming right out to the people and saying, "You need to do this for me." I think he's reluctant to put himself front and center in this request, and he hopes that hinting will suffice. So we see all throughout our Parsha and next week's Parsha that he repeats over and over that the people will be crossing over. I will not be crossing over. This phrase "crossing over" is repeated over and over again. But there's another issue about why Moshe cannot ask the people directly for what he wants. And I think this is so psychologically interesting. The Mei HaShiloach and Zornberg say that the people themselves have to desire it. It cannot be as a result of an instruction, meaning that they have to feel the lack and loss of Moshe in their lives, and the lack and loss of Moshe not being with them on the other side of the Jordan, not being with them in Eretz Israel. And therefore, this wanting to pray for that will come out of them as a result of their own desire, of their own feeling that they do not want to bear the lack of being with Moshe. So to me, it's like demanding that someone tell you that they love you. And then when you get the response, I love you, it somehow feels hollow or inadequate or meaningless and perhaps even false. But if the declaration is freely given without asking for it, then it feels sincere and true. So Moshe wants the people to sincerely petition on his behalf through heartfelt prayer, but they don't take the hint. And I'm going to explain a little later what Zornberg says about their lack of ability to take the hint. Another thing Zornberg brings out is what would possess Moshe, the leader, in one of his final speeches, to report such a crushing interaction with God. She asks, what is his rhetorical purpose, the implicit demand he's making on his audience? The act of crossing over, to me, implies the end of the story and the beginning of another. To move past is, in effect, to leave something in the past, a transition where a door is opening and one moves through a threshold, leaving behind what is on the other side. Moshe must be recounting this harsh and humiliating exchange with God, not because he wants to leave the people with a feeling that they are to blame or to shame them, but because there must be an additional lesson for him to teach as a result. After all, he is Moshe RABBEINU, Moshe our teacher. And we can presume that everything he says in this final book of the Torah is for the sake of God and for the sake of impressing the people with the important lessons that he wants to inscribe in their hearts. And I think that will be a theme for me for the rest of the book. What is the lesson here? Why is this so important for Moshe to say either again or for the first time or even differently? So I'm going to use that kind of as a prevailing theme to help me navigate through the next few psukim until we reach the end of the Torah. Another clue about the existence of his underlying message to the people is found in the retelling of the story with Yitro, as I said, but specifically in a group of 3 words. So remember when I told you that when Moshe was setting up this hierarchical system of judges, that the mandate was to find distinguished men who are wise, understanding, and well-known. So the implication is that Moshe may be speaking to wise and well-known people in this opening speech here, but that they lack binah, they lack understanding. And how do I make that connection? In our parsha, we read that when Moshe is recounting the story of needing judges, the people answered with, the thing that you have proposed to do is good. But then in the very next sentence in Parshat Yitro, after Moshe talks about appointing these judges, we read, so I took the heads of your tribes, distinguished men who were wise and well-known, and I appointed them as heads over you, heads over thousands, heads over tens, over 50s, over hundreds. So it seems at first reading that this is a reiteration of both the mandate and what Moshe ended up doing. But with a careful reading, you'll see that what is omitted from this list of adjectives is the attribute of understanding, of binah. So what Moshe had originally wanted to appoint was men who were wise, distinguished, understanding, and well-known. And what he ended up appointing were distinguished men who were well and unknown. There's no mention of binah. There's no mention of understanding in this. So our sages explain that while Moshe was able to find many men who were wise and well-known, they lacked binah. They lacked understanding. So what is that specifically, and why does it relate here? Well, the leap here and the connection is binah is what the people are lacking now, the people listening to him. the ability to understand and intuit. So this lack of intuition is what Moshe found, and he's looking for people who understand the implication of what he is saying and can intuit from that he is asking the people to plead in his behalf. So later on in Sefer Devarim, in Parshat Ki Tavo, which is almost at the end of our book, we come across another key passage that I think shines light on what I'm trying to explain to you. Moshe is again and still speaking to the people, of course. He's teaching, and he says, "But Hashem did not give you a heart to know, or eyes to see, or ears to hear until this day." Every year I love reading this phrase because I think that finally we have a heart to know, we have ears to see, we have eyes to see, we have ears to hear. But there's another reading of this verse. There's another reading of this verse that implies just the opposite. When Moshe says, "But Hashem did not give you a heart to know or eyes to see or ears to hear until this day," it could also mean, and you still don't have a heart to know or eyes to see or ears to hear until this very day could mean, and that lack and problem has continued today. And I think that really gives us kind of the key to what the problem is with the people not perceiving his implicit message. So the lesson from Moshe, I think, I'll take it a step farther. And the lesson from the Parsha, and why Moshe is telling and retelling this story, and on the surface blaming the people, is that we have to constantly strive for bina, for this understanding, for the intuition. We need to be sensitive to what is said implicitly as well as explicitly. We have to read the signs in ourselves and in others, the body language, perhaps a hesitation in speech, so that we can understand the underlying messages behind the intent and appreciate our friends, our family members, our co-workers, our community members, and yes, even sometimes our adversaries, appreciate what they're trying to convey to us. If we only take and understand things literally, we may miss the most important messages that are trying to be conveyed. So I believe that is the additional lesson that Moshe is trying to convey here, and that we can derive from the continuation of my midrash about what was really behind God's harsh decree to Moshe. A message that it was time to push Bnei Yisrael from the protective cocoon of the nest and Moshe's leadership. And here the continued message may be that even one so great as Moshe can be subject to the wrath and harshness of God, so that we all better watch our step. But even more important than that is that in order for us to be fully righteous, understanding, empathetic humans, we need to be open to a level of understanding and a level of intuition that goes past the literal. Shabbat Shalom.